Welcome, gentle listener, to another journey through the quiet corridors of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle back, let your shoulders relax, allow your mind to drift along with us into the world of Napoleon Bonaparte. Not the conquering emperor you might expect, but Napoleon, the man who ate, who hungered, who found comfort and identity in the simple act of sharing a meal. Imagine yourself stepping away from the bright screens and urgent demands of today, leaving behind the endless choices of modern cuisine, the refrigerated abundance, the 24-hour availability of any food your heart might desire. Hey, tonight we journey back to an age when food was scarce, when a warm meal could mean the difference between life and death, when the emperor of half of Europe might dine on the same hard biscuit as his lowliest soldier, or feast on delicacies that would make kings weep with envy. The relationship between Napoleon and food tells us a story far more intimate than any battlefield victory or political maneuvering. It speaks to the man beneath the uniform, the human appetites that drove one of history's most complex figures. Through his meals, his hungers, his peculiar preferences and eating habits, we glimpse something profound about power, about comfort, about the ways we nourish both body and spirit in times of triumph and defeat. So breathe deeply, let your eyes grow heavy if they wish, and allow yourself to be transported to a time when the very act of eating was an adventure, a necessity, and sometimes a luxury beyond imagination. The rhythm of history moves slowly tonight. It's measured not in the thunder of cannons, but in the gentle clink of silverware, the soft whisper of bread being broken, the quiet satisfaction of hunger finally met. Picture yourself awakening before dawn in a muddy field somewhere in the Austrian countryside, the year 1805. The ground beneath you is hard and cold, and you can feel the dampness seeping through your thin woolen uniform. You are a soldier in Napoleon's Grande Armum, copyright E, and your stomach a euro. Your stomach is a constant, knowing companion that never lets you forget its presence. The ration system of Napoleon's army was, in theory, a marvel of military organization. Each soldier was entitled to receive daily provisions, 24 ounces of bread, or in its absence, 20 ounces of hardtack biscuit, half a pound of meat when available, though this luxury grew increasingly rare as campaigns stretched longer and supply lines grew thinner. A measure of beans or rice, some salt, and on fortunate days, a small ration of brandy to warm the blood and dull the edge of hunger. But theory, as any soldier could tell you, bore little resemblance to the reality of campaign life. Imagine the frustration of watching supply wagons sink axle-deep in autumn mud, their precious cargo of flour and salted pork becoming unreachable. Picture the slow realization that today's march would stretch 18 hours instead of 8. That the promised supply depot existed only on some general's optimistic map, that your stomach would clench and growl for another day. The hardtack euro, those rectangular biscuits baked to the consistency of Roof Talisa. Euro became the soldier's most reliable companion. These pale, tooth-breaking squares could survive rain, snow, and the rough handling of military transport. Soldiers would soak them in whatever liquid they could find. Coffee when available. Thin soup when fortunate. Muddy water when desperate. The biscuits would absorb moisture and soften into something approaching edibility, though they never quite lost their ability to chip teeth or harbor weevils in their dense flour and water hearts. You learn to eat around the small black insects, grateful for the protein. You discover that hardtack tastes marginally better when crumbled into hot water with a pinch of salt, creating a gruel that fills your stomach, if not your soul. On cold mornings, you might toast pieces over a small fire, watching them turn golden and emit the faintest suggestion of bread-like aroma, a ghost of the bakeries you remember from home. Meat, when it appeared, arrived in forms that would challenge even the most adventurous modern palate. Salt pork, stored in barrels and cured to the texture of leather, required long soaking before it resembled food. Soldiers would hack off portions with their bayonets, the only cutting tools most possessed, and boil the tough strips until they achieved a chewable consistency. The resulting broth, cloudy with fat and salt, became precious soup stock, too valuable to waste despite its overwhelming salinity. Fresh meat was a rare gift, usually appearing after the army had encountered local livestock encounters that rarely ended well for the animals. A cow or sheep might feed a dozen soldiers, butchered with military efficiency and cooked over open fires that filled the evening air with smoke and the intoxicating scent of roasting flesh. These moments of abundance punctuated long stretches of scarcity, creating memories that soldiers would savor more deeply than the meat itself. Vegetables existed in the realm of fantasy for most of Napoleon's soldiers. Dried beans, when available, provided essential nutrition, but required hours of soaking and cooking, luxuries of time and fuel that military life rarely afforded. Soldiers learned to appreciate the rare wild onion, the occasional patch of edible greens found growing beside country roads. These small additions to the monotonous diet took on significance far beyond their nutritional value, representing connection to the earth, to growing things, to life beyond the endless cycle of march and fight. The search for food became a constant undercurrent to military life. Soldiers developed intricate networks of foraging, trading, and acquisition that operated alongside the official supply system. They learned which houses might trade bread for buttons cut from uniform coats, which villages might still possess hidden stores of grain, which fellow soldiers might be willing to share a discovered cache of dried fruit in exchange for future favors. Foraging, a polite military term for organized scrounging, became an art form. Soldiers spread across the countryside like hungry ghosts, searching through abandoned houses, investigating root cellars, following their noses toward any suggestion of food. They learned to recognize the signs of hidden provisions, the too casual manner of a peasant claiming poverty, a freshly disturbed earth that might conceal buried grain, the nervous behavior of livestock that suggested recent feeding. Water, that most basic necessity, presented its own challenges. Soldiers learned to judge water quality by sight and smell, choosing the clearest available option while knowing that clarity guaranteed nothing. They developed strong stomachs out of necessity, drinking from streams that livestock had muddied, from wells that hadn't been cleaned in years, from puddles when no other source presented itself. Dysentery and stomach ailments moved through army camps like invisible enemies, weakening more soldiers than enemy bullets ever would. The communal aspect of eating provided both comfort and competition. Soldiers formed small groups, sharing resources and cooking duties when circumstances allowed. These informal families created pools of supplies and skills. One man might possess a small cooking pot, another a skill at starting fires in wet weather, a third the knack of trading with local populations. Round these tiny campfires, bonds formed that transcended military hierarchy. A sergeant might share his last piece of cheese with a private, understanding that tomorrow the roles might reverse. The psychological weight of constant hunger shaped military life in ways that generals rarely acknowledged in their dispatches. Tired, underfed soldiers moved more slowly, thought less clearly, and made mistakes that well-fed troops would avoid. The promise of a good meal could motivate men through seemingly impossible marches, while the absence of food could transform disciplined soldiers into desperate scavengers. Napoleon understood this dynamic better than most commanders, though his understanding didn't always translate into better provisioning for his troops. Sleep brought little respite from hunger. Soldiers dreamed of their mother's cooking, of the bakeries and markets of home, of feasts they had eaten or imagined eating. They woke to the same grinding emptiness, the same daily calculation of resources and needs. The lucky ones developed the ability to function despite constant hunger, their bodies adapting to operate on minimal fuel. Others grew weak, fell behind during marches, and disappeared from the rolls without ceremony or remembrance. Yet somehow, these hungry soldiers accomplished the impossible. They marched across Europe, fought brilliant battles, and built an empire that stretched from Spain to Poland. Their achievement becomes even more remarkable when measured against their empty stomachs, their constant search for the next meal, their ability to find strength when strength should have abandoned them entirely. The contrast between their sacrifice and their emperor's stinning habits would become increasingly stark as campaigns stretched longer and supply lines grew more tenuous. But that disparity belonged to a different world, one of linen tablecloths and crystal glasses of choices and abundance that existed in the same universe, but felt impossibly distant from the muddy fields, where soldiers learned to find nourishment in hardtack and hope. Now, let us step from the muddy fields of campaign life into a different world entirely, the warm, aromatic realm of the imperial kitchen, where a man named Louis-Étienne Dunand devoted his life to understanding the palate of an emperor. Imagine yourself in the soft glow of copper pots and flickering candlelight, where the concerns of battle gave way to the delicate art of creating perfect meals for the most powerful man in Europe. Dunand was not born to serve emperors. His story begins in the modest kitchen of a country where, as a child, he learned to judge the doneness of bread by the sound it made when tapped, where he discovered that the secret to a perfect sauce lay not in expensive ingredients but in patience and attention. His small hands grew accustomed to the weight of iron pans, the heat of cooking fires, the rhythm of chopping and stirring that would define his entire existence. Picture young Dunand in those early years, perhaps 12 or 13, his face flushed from kitchen heat as he learned to crack eggs with one hand, to tell when onions had reached the perfect translucent state, to sense the exact moment when cream would turn from liquid to the thick consistency his master demanded. The kitchen was his classroom, and every meal taught him something new about the alchemy of transforming simple ingredients into something approaching magic. His talent revealed itself gradually, the way most true gifts do. Fellow cooks began to notice that dishes prepared by Dunand possessed a certain indefinable quality, not flashy or overly complex, but perfectly balanced, each flavor distinct yet harmonious with the whole. He developed an intuitive understanding of how different foods complemented each other, how a pinch of herbs could transform an ordinary soup into something memorable, how the texture of properly prepared vegetables could elevate even the simplest meal. The path from country kitchen to imperial service was neither straight nor simple. Dunand worked in provincial inns and city taverns, gradually building a reputation among those who appreciated fine cooking. He learned to adapt his skills to different kitchens, different ingredients, different expectations. Each position taught him something new: how to manage subordinates, how to plan elaborate meals, how to maintain quality even when cooking for large numbers of people. When Napoleon first encountered Dunan's cooking, the future emperor was still a young general. It's ambitious but not yet touched by the refinements that would later define imperial life. The meal itself was unremarkable by later standards, perhaps a simple chicken prepared with herbs, served with carefully prepared vegetables and fresh bread. But something in that meal spoke to Napoleon's emerging sense of his own importance, his growing appetite for the finer things that power could provide. Dunand understood instinctively that cooking for Napoleon required more than culinary skill. He needed to become a student of his master's moods, preferences, and peculiarities. Napoleon ate quickly, often mechanically, his mind occupied with military strategy and political calculation. Dunant learned to prepare foods that would satisfy without demanding attention, meals that could be consumed rapidly, but still provide proper nourishment and pleasure. The chef discovered that Napoleon possessed an unusual palate for a man of his background and temperament. The emperor preferred simple flavors prepared perfectly rather than elaborate dishes designed to impress. He had little patience for complicated sauces or foods that required careful eating. Dunant adapted his considerable skills to create meals that appeared effortless but required enormous expertise to execute properly. Consider the challenge of preparing meals for a man whose schedule recognized no normal rhythm. Napoleon might demand breakfast at 3 in the afternoon, dinner at midnight, or a full meal at dawn before departing on a campaign that could last months. Dunant learned to maintain ingredients in various states of preparation, ready to complete dishes at a moment's notice. He developed techniques for keeping food warm without overcooking, for reheating delicate items without ruining their texture, for creating meals that could travel and still retain their intended flavors. The relationship between chef and emperor transcended the typical master-servant dynamic. Dunant became keeper of Napoleon's domestic comfort, the one person whose presence could transform a tent or rough quarters into something approaching home. Through food, he provided continuity in a life otherwise defined by constant change and upheaval. A perfectly prepared omelet could anchor Napoleon's morning, regardless of whether he woke in the Tuileries Palace or a canvas shelter beside some distant battlefield. Dunant's notebooks, preserved in fragments, reveal the meticulous attention he paid to Napoleon's preferences and aversions. The emperor disliked fish, finding most preparations too delicate for his robust tastes. He preferred meat cooked simply but thoroughly, with flavors that complemented rather than masked the natural taste. Vegetables needed to retain some texture. Napoleon had no patience for the overcooked preparations, common in aristocratic kitchens of the period. The chef learned to read Napoleon's moods through his eating habits. When preoccupied with difficult decisions, the emperor would eat mechanically, barely tasting his food. During periods of confidence and optimism, he might linger over meals, even offering opinions on preparation or seasoning. Dunant adjusted his approach accordingly, sometimes preparing comfort foods that required no attention, other times creating small culinary surprises designed to capture Napoleon's wandering focus. Travel presented unique challenges that tested Dunant's resourcefulness and adaptability. Campaign kitchens bore little resemblance to the well-equipped facilities of palaces and permanent residences. Dunant learned to create satisfying meals using portable cooking equipment, local ingredients of uncertain quality, and whatever supplies the commissary could provide. He developed a portable spice collection, carefully selected seasonings that could transform basic ingredients into something approaching his usual standards. The famous chicken marengo, perhaps the most celebrated dish associated with Napoleon's table, emerged from one of these campaign cooking challenges. After the Battle of Marengo in 1800, with enemy forces scattered and supply lines uncertain, Dunant found himself tasked with preparing a victory meal, using whatever ingredients could be foraged or procured locally. A chicken, some tomatoes, eggs, and crayfish from a nearby stream, hardly the components of an imperial feast. Yet Dunant's skill transformed these humble ingredients into a dish that Napoleon would request repeatedly throughout his reign. The creation of chicken marengo illustrates Dunant's greatest talent, his ability to find excellence in limitations. Rather than lamenting the absence of preferred ingredients, he embraced the challenge of working with what fortune provided. The dish succeeded not because of expensive components, but because of perfect technique, careful attention to flavor balance, and the chef's intuitive understanding of what would satisfy his demanding master. As Napoleon's power grew, so did the complexity of Dunant's responsibilities. The chef found himself managing not just the emperor's personal meals, but the elaborate state dinners that had become essential tools of diplomacy and statecraft. These formal occasions required different skills, the ability to plan menus that would impress foreign dignitaries, while respecting their dietary customs. To coordinate with palace staff unfamiliar with his methods, to maintain quality while scaling recipes to serve dozens of important guests. Yet, through all these expansions of duty and responsibility, Dunant never lost sight of his primary mission: understanding and satisfying Napoleon's personal relationship with food. He remained the keeper of simple pleasures in a life increasingly dominated by complex political calculations. In the privacy of Napoleon's personal quarters, Dunant could still be found preparing a perfectly simple omelet or a piece of roasted chicken, seasoned exactly to the emperor's taste. The chef's influence extended beyond the kitchen in ways that few people recognized. His consistent presence provided stability in Napoleon's increasingly unstable world. While generals might fall from favor and ministers might lose their positions, Dunant remained, offering through his cooking a sense of continuity and comfort that no amount of political maneuvering could provide. During the disasters of 1812 and 1813, as Napoleon's empire began to crumble, Dunant's role became even more crucial. Food became scarce even for the imperial household, and the chef's ability to create satisfying meals from minimal ingredients took on new importance. He learned to stretch supplies, to make humble ingredients seem more substantial, to maintain some semblance of civilized dining, even as the world around them descended into chaos. The end, when it came, found Dunant as devoted as ever to his impossible master. Even in exile, the chef continued to serve, adapting his skills to the limited resources of remote islands, creating what comfort he could for a fallen emperor whose appetite for power had been replaced by simpler hungers that Dunant, at least, could still satisfy. In the quiet moments between history's great events, in the gentle rhythm of chopping and stirring, the careful attention to detail that transforms cooking into art, Dunant created something lasting. His legacy lives not in the grand gestures of empire, but in the intimate act of nourishment. In the understanding that even emperors need someone who cares whether their eggs are properly cooked, their bread fresh, their simple human needs met with skill and devotion. A deep dive into his culinary preferences let us now draw closer to the man himself, peering through the intimate lens of his daily appetites to understand something essential about Napoleon Bonaparte. Imagine yourself seated at a small table, perhaps in his private study at the Tuileries, watching as the emperor approaches his evening meal with the same intensity he brought to military campaigns, yet tempered by the simple human pleasure of satisfying hunger. Napoleon's relationship with food was, like everything else about him, complicated by contradictions. Here was a man who could reshape the map of Europe, yet remain surprisingly conservative in his dining preferences. He possessed the resources to command any delicacy his heart might desire, yet his tastes ran toward foods that would not have seemed out of place on a middle-class French table of his youth. Coffee held a place of almost mystical importance in Napoleon's daily routine. Not the delicate aromatic coffee preferred by the aristocracy, but a preparation so strong it resembled liquid energy more than beverage. He demanded his coffee thick enough to float a coin, black as midnight, hot enough to burn the tongue of anyone foolish enough to drink it quickly. The emperor would consume cup after cup, seemingly immune to the bitter intensity that would overwhelm most palates. Picture Napoleon in the early morning hours, perhaps 3 or 4 o'clock, when most of Europe still slept peacefully. He would summon his valet, dress quickly, and make his way to his study, where the first cup of coffee awaited him like a faithful ally. The ceramic would be warm to prevent the coffee from cooling too quickly, and Napoleon would drink slowly, savoring not just the taste, but the ritual itself. The few moments of quiet before the day's storm of decisions and demands began in earnest. His coffee consumption became legendary among those who served him. Servants learned to keep fresh supplies always at hand, understanding that the emperor's productivity and mood often correlated directly with the availability of his preferred stimulant. During long military councils or marathon work sessions, Napoleon might consume a dozen cups or more each, one prepared to his exact specifications, strong enough to wake the dead, hot enough to steam, bitter enough to cut through the fog of exhaustion that accompanied his 18-hour workdays. Bread occupied another realm of fundamental importance in Napoleon's dietary world. But not just any bread, he demanded the finest white bread that French baking could produce. Loaves with crusts that crackled when broken, and interiors so pale and fine they seemed almost ethereal. This preference spoke to something deeper than mere taste. White bread represented prosperity, civilization, the triumph of French agricultural and culinary arts over the coarse dark breads consumed by peasants and soldiers. Napoleon would break his bread with deliberate care, examining each piece as if it might reveal secrets about the baker's skill or the quality of the flour. He preferred it slightly warm, the interior still soft enough to compress gently between thumb and forefinger. When traveling, special arrangements ensured that fresh bread reached him daily, sometimes transported dozens of miles by dedicated couriers who understood that their seemingly simple cargo held importance far beyond its humble appearance. The emperor's approach to meat revealed his essentially practical nature beneath all the imperial pageantry. He favored preparations that delivered maximum flavor with minimum fuss-roasted chicken with crispy skin and juicy meat. Beef prepared simply but perfectly, lamb seasoned with herbs that enhanced rather than disguised its natural taste. Napoleon had no patience for elaborate presentations that prioritized appearance over substance, preferring dishes that could be eaten efficiently while his mind remained focused on weightier matters. Chicken, in particular, held a special place in his affections. Not the delicate preparations favored by aristocratic tables, but robust, well-seasoned birds roasted until the skin achieved that perfect balance between crispy and tender. Napoleon would eat methodically, using knife and fork with military precision. He preferred the dark meat for its richer flavor, leaving the breast meat for others who prioritized appearance over taste. Eggs provided another foundation of Napoleon's dietary preferences, though again, simplicity reigned supreme. A perfectly prepared omelet became one of his most requested dishes. Not the elaborate preparations stuffed with expensive ingredients that court chefs might have suggested, but a simple creation of eggs, butter, and perhaps a whisper of herbs cooked until just set but still creamy in the center. The emperor judged the skill of any cook by their ability to prepare this seemingly simple dish to his exacting standards. Picture Napoleon breaking his fast with such an omelet. The eggs still warm and slightly runny, accompanied by his obligatory coffee and a piece of fresh bread. These simple elements combined to create a meal that satisfied both his physical needs and his appreciation for perfectly executed fundamentals. He ate quickly, but not carelessly, his movements economical and purposeful, wasting neither time nor energy on unnecessary ceremony. Vegetables earned Napoleon's respect when prepared with the same attention to quality that he demanded in all things. He favored green beans cooked until tender but still possessing some texture, their natural flavor enhanced with butter and a touch of salt. Potatoes prepared simply, perhaps roasted with herbs or formed into a gratin, provided satisfying substance without demanding excessive attention from the diner. Napoleon had little patience for raw preparations or overly elaborate vegetable courses that seemed designed more to impress than to nourish. His relationship with wine proved more complex than his straightforward approach to food. Napoleon appreciated fine wines but rarely allowed himself to become absorbed in their subtleties. He preferred Burgundies and Bordeaux of excellent quality, wines with enough character to complement his meals without requiring lengthy consideration or discussion. A glass or two with dinner satisfied him. He had observed too many men lose their sharpness to excessive indulgence in alcohol to risk such weakness himself. The emperor's sweet tooth, when it manifested, ran toward simple pleasures rather than elaborate confections. He enjoyed well-made pastries, croissants, with their delicate layers of butter and dough. Simple fruit tarts that showcased the quality of seasonal ingredients. Chocolate prepared in the traditional French manner. These treats appeared occasionally rather than regularly, special indulgences rather than daily expectations. Ice cream captured Napoleon's imagination in a way that surprised those who knew his generally practical approach to dining. Perhaps the novelty of the frozen dessert appealed to his appreciation for innovation, or maybe the clean, simple flavors provided a refreshing contrast to his typically robust meals. He favored vanilla and chocolate preparations, served in small portions that cleansed the palate without overwhelming it. Timing played a crucial role in Napoleon's approach to meals. He ate when his schedule permitted, rather than adhering to conventional dining hours, sometimes consuming a full dinner at 10 in the morning or breaking his fast at 3 in the afternoon. This irregular pattern reflected both his workaholic tendencies and his fundamental belief that personal comfort should never dictate imperial duty. Yet when Napoleon did eat, he brought complete attention to the experience. Unlike many powerful men who treated meals as opportunities for business discussions, Napoleon often preferred to dine in relative silence, using the time to rest. His mind from the constant stream of decisions and calculations that filled his waking hours, food became a form of meditation, a brief respite from the overwhelming responsibilities of empire. His preferences also revealed a deep connection to his Mediterranean origins. Olive oil, when available, found its way into his meals, adding richness and a subtle reminder of his Corsican childhood. Simple preparations of fish, when his notorious aversion could be overcome, transported him back to the coastal flavors of his youth. These small touches of regional cuisine provided emotional nourishment alongside physical sustenance. The emperor's drinking habits extended beyond wine to include occasional indulgences in brandy or cognac, particularly during cold weather campaigns. These spirits served medicinal as well as pleasurable purposes, warming the body and steadying nerves during particularly stressful periods. Napoleon approached alcohol with the same discipline he applied to other pleasures, useful in moderation, dangerous in excess. Perhaps most revealing was Napoleon's attitude toward dining companions. He preferred small, intimate meals with close associates to elaborate state dinners when given the choice. Around a simple table, sharing uncomplicated but perfectly prepared food, the emperor could relax his guard sufficiently to reveal glimpses of the man beneath the imperial facade. These quiet meals provided some of his happiest moments, brief interludes of normal human companionship in a life otherwise defined by isolation and overwhelming responsibility. Through these preferences, these simple daily choices about what to eat and how to eat it, we glimpse something essential about Napoleon's character. His foods reflected his values: quality over ostentation, efficiency over ceremony, substance over appearance. In a world where he could command anything, he chose the fundamental pleasures that connected him to his origins, to his humanity, to the simple satisfactions that transcend power and politics. Napoleon's feasts versus the common soldier is meal. Now, we must turn our attention to one of history's most stark contrasts: the chasm that existed between the emperor's table and the meager rations of those who fought and died in his name. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of two worlds. On one side, the warm glow of imperial dining rooms, where crystal glasses catch candlelight and silver serving dishes reflect the faces of well-fed courtiers. On the other, the smoky darkness of military camps where hungry men huddle around flickering fires, grateful for whatever sustenance they can find. This contrast reveals something profound about power, about empire, about the human cost of ambition measured not in grand political terms, but in the simple, devastating arithmetic of who eats well and who goes hungry. The distance between Napoleon's perfectly prepared omelet and his soldier-esque weevil-infested hardtack represents more than mere social inequality. It illuminates the fundamental contradictions that would ultimately contribute to empire's collapse. Consider a typical evening at the Tuileries Palace during the height of Napoleon's power, perhaps in 1807, when his victories at Jena and Arstedt had secured French dominance over much of continental Europe. The imperial dining room glows with the light of dozens of candles, their flames dancing across polished mahogany and gleaming silverware. The emperor enters, his day's work finally concluded, ready to enjoy the careful preparations that Dunand has orchestrated for his pleasure and nourishment. The table before Napoleon groans beneath the weight of abundance. Fresh bread still warm from palace ovens, its crust crackling softly as servants slice it into precise portions. Roasted fowl with skin that glistens golden in the candlelight, the meat so tender it falls from the bone at the gentle pressure of a fork. Vegetables prepared to perfection, green beans that still possess their vibrant color and delicate snap. Potatoes transformed into silky pure that dissolve on the tongue. Carrots glazed until they shine like amber jewels. Wine flows from bottles whose labels represent the finest vintages of France's most celebrated regions. Burgundies that have aged to perfect maturity in cellars beneath ancient chateaux, their deep red color catching the light like liquid rubies. Champagne that bubbles with effervescent joy, served in crystal glasses thin enough to sing when touched by a fingernail. These wines don't simply accompany the meal, they elevate it, transforming mere eating into an experience of refined pleasure. But imagine if you can bear to make this mental journey, the simultaneous reality existing just miles away from the palace, where soldiers of the Grande Arme huddle in whatever shelter they can construct against the autumn cold. Here the light comes not from elegant candles, but from small fires fed with whatever wood the men can scavenge broken. Furniture from abandoned houses, fence posts torn from frozen ground, sometimes the wooden stocks of damaged muskets that no longer serve their intended purpose. Around these pathetic fires, groups of soldiers attempt to transform their meager rations into something approaching a meal. The hardtack that represents their primary sustenance requires ingenuity to become edible. Some men have learned to crush it between rocks, creating a coarse flour that can be mixed with water to form a paste. Others prefer to toast pieces directly over the flames, hoping the heat might improve the flavor while knowing it changes little beyond adding a thin layer of char to the surface. The contrast becomes most painful when we consider the meat available to each group. While Napoleon's table features perfectly roasted chicken with crispy skin and succulent meat, his soldiers make do with salt pork that has been preserved for months in wooden barrels. This meat, if it can still be called that, resembles leather more than food. It requires hours of soaking to remove enough salt to make it palatable, followed by long boiling to achieve a texture that human teeth can manage to chew. When soldiers do encounter fresh meat, usually through the unfortunate intersection of military movements with local livestock, the contrast with imperial dining becomes almost comical in its extremes. A scrawny chicken, hastily slaughtered and roasted over an open fire by men with no culinary training, bears little resemblance to the perfectly prepared fowl gracing Napoleon's table. Yet the soldiers' appreciation for their rough meal often exceeds the emperor's satisfaction with his elegant feast, 'cause hunger seasons food with flavors that abundance can never match. The vegetables available to common soldiers existed largely in the realm of imagination. While Napoleon enjoyed beans cooked to tender perfection, his men considered themselves fortunate to discover a few wild onions growing beside country roads. These small bulbs, often bitter from poor soil and lack of cultivation, nonetheless, represented luxury to men whose diet consisted primarily of bread and preserved meat. A handful of questionable greens found growing in the corners of abandoned gardens became treasures to be shared among friends. Water itself illustrates the vast gulf between imperial comfort and military reality. Napoleon's table featured not only fine wines, but also the purest water available, drawn from selected sources and sometimes flavored with fruit or herbs to enhance its appeal. His soldiers drank from whatever sources they could find, streams muddied by the passage of thousands of feet and hooves, wells that hadn't been cleaned in years, puddles that formed in wagon ruts after rainstorms. They learned to strain water through cloth when possible, to boil it when fuel permitted, to drink it regardless when thirst overcame caution. The rituals surrounding meals reveal equally stark contrasts. Napoleon's dinners followed established protocols of service courses arriving at precisely timed intervals. Wines selected to complement each dish, servants trained to anticipate the emperor's every need before he expressed it. The entire experience was choreographed to provide maximum pleasure with minimum effort on the diner's part. Soldiers, by comparison, participated in the entire process of food procurement and preparation. They foraged, bartered, and sometimes stole the ingredients for their meals. They gathered fuel for fires, prepared their own food with whatever tools they possessed, and cleaned their simple utensils in cold streams when water was available. Every aspect of eating required effort, planning, and often considerable risk. The social dynamics of dining also differed dramatically between these two worlds. Napoleon often dined alone or with a small circle of intimate associates. The conversation flowing as smoothly as the wine, touching on literature, politics, and strategy without the desperate undertones of genuine need. His meals represented respite from responsibility, brief interludes of pleasure in a life dominated by the weight of empire. Soldiers ate in groups bound together by shared hardship rather than social position. Around their small fires, men who might never have spoken in civilian life shared stories, resources, and the small comforts that made military life bearable. These communal meals created bonds forged by mutual dependence. The understanding that today's generosity with a piece of cheese might be repaid tomorrow with a share of discovered sausage. Yet perhaps the most profound difference lay not in the quality of food, but in the certainty of its availability. Napoleon never wondered whether his next meal would appear or what it might contain. The imperial kitchen operated with clockwork precision, ensuring that food materialized whenever the emperor desired it, prepared exactly to his specifications. This certainty freed him to focus entirely on the broader concerns of leadership and strategy. His soldiers lived with constant uncertainty about even the most basic sustenance. They went to sleep hungry and woke wondering whether today would bring adequate rations or another day of gnawing emptiness. This uncertainty affected every aspect of military life, from the energy available for marching to the morale necessary for fighting. Well-fed armies fight differently than hungry ones, and Napoleon's men often fought with the desperate energy of those who knew their next meal was far from guaranteed. The irony of this contrast was not lost on Napoleon himself, though he rarely acknowledged it directly. He understood that armies moved on their stomachs, that hungry soldiers made poor warriors, that the empire's ultimate success depended on maintaining adequate supplies for his troops. Yet the practical challenges of feeding hundreds of thousands of men across vast distances often proved insurmountable, creating a perpetual tension between imperial ambitions and logistical realities. During the Russian campaign of 1812, this contrast reached its most extreme expression. As Napoleon's army trudged through the endless Russian winter, soldiers began dying not from enemy action, but from simple starvation and exposure. Meanwhile, in the imperial baggage train, Napoleon's personal chef still attempted to maintain some semblance of proper dining. Creating meals from increasingly limited ingredients while around them, an entire army slowly dissolved into scattered bands of desperate, starving men. The psychological impact of this inequality rippled through the ranks in ways that military historians often overlook. Soldiers who had marched hundreds of miles on empty stomachs, who had watched comrades weaken and fall behind, would learn to find sustenance in foods that would have been fed to pigs in peacetime, naturally began to question the system that demanded such sacrifices from them, while providing such comfort to their leaders. This questioning didn't necessarily translate into open rebellion, military discipline, and genuine affection for Napoleon prevented that in most cases. But it created a gradual erosion of the mystique that had once made French soldiers willing to follow their emperor anywhere, the man who could command any delicacy his heart desired, while they gnawed on leather hard. Biscuits began to seem less like a fellow soldier who had risen through merit, and more like just another aristocrat who had never known genuine hunger. The ultimate tragedy of this contrast lies not in its existence. Inequality has always characterized human societies, but in its waste. The resources devoted to maintaining imperial luxury could have provided meaningful improvements to military rations. The attention paid to perfecting Napoleon's personal dining experience might have been directed towards solving the logistical challenges that left his soldiers hungry. The empire possessed sufficient wealth to feed both emperor and army well, but the priorities embedded in its structure ensured that abundance flowed upward while scarcity trickled down. As we drift towards sleep, let us hold in our minds this image: two groups of Frenchmen, united in their service to the same cause, separated by the accident of birth and the mathematics of power. One group dines by candlelight on perfectly prepared food, their greatest concern whether the wine properly complements the evening's roast. The other huddles around smoky fires, grateful for hard bread and hoping tomorrow might bring something more substantial. Both groups believed they were building something glorious, something that would echo through history. Only one was destined to pay the true price of that ambition. And so we reach the end of our gentle journey through the world of Napoleon's table, where the simple act of eating reveals profound truths about power, humanity, and the price of empire. As you settle deeper into comfort, let these images fade slowly from your mind, like the last light of evening giving way to peaceful darkness. We have traveled from the muddy fields where hungry soldiers learn to find nourishment in hardtack and hope through the warm kitchens, where dedicated chefs transform simple ingredients into perfect meals, into the intimate dining spaces where an emperor revealed his humanity through his modest tastes and simple pleasures, and finally to the stark contrast that illuminated the vast distances between privilege and sacrifice. Through it all, food served as our guide, not the grand political machinations that usually dominate historical narratives, but the quiet, essential rhythms of nourishment that connect us all. In Napoleon's strong coffee and perfect omelets, we glimpse the man beneath the crown. In his soldiers' creative attempts to transform hardtack into something approaching bread, we witness the resilience of the human spirit. In the careful preparations of devoted chefs, we saw dedication that transcended mere employment to become art. Perhaps what emerges most clearly from this exploration is how the fundamental human need for sustenance both unites and divides us. The emperor and the common soldier shared the same basic hunger, the same need for nourishment, the same comfort found in a satisfying meal. Yet the circumstances of their births and the structure of their society ensured that this shared need would be met in vastly different ways, creating chasms that would ultimately contribute to empire's end. Rest easy now, knowing that you exist in an age of abundance that Napoleon's soldiers could never have imagined. Your kitchen holds more variety than most emperors commanded. Simple meals surpass in quality and safety the finest preparations available to previous centuries. The hardships of history serve to illuminate the quiet miracles of the present. The reliable availability of fresh food, the certainty that hunger will be satisfied, the luxury of choosing what to eat rather than simply being grateful for anything edible. Let your mind drift now like smoke from those long extinguished campfires, like steam rising from bowls of simple soup that once meant the difference between hope and despair. In the gentle rhythm of your breathing, in the comfortable warmth of your rest, in the security of knowing that tomorrow will bring adequate nourishment, you possess riches that surpass anything Napoleon's empire could offer. Sleep peacefully, nourished not just by food, but by the knowledge that history's struggles and sacrifices have led to this moment of comfort and plenty. In dreams, perhaps you'll taste the simple pleasures that connected emperor and soldier alike, the satisfaction of hunger met, the comfort of warmth shared, the basic human joy of breaking bread with those we love. The past fades gently into memory, its lessons learned, its stories told. What remains is the eternal rhythm of nourishment and rest, the cycle that sustains all life, the simple miracle of another day drawing peacefully to its close. Rest well, knowing that you are fed, you are warm, you are safe, and tomorrow will bring its own quiet abundance. Good night.